Namaskar, welcome to 10 News Network. Welcome to 10 News Live ISOL Foundation Swami Vivekananda 158th Birth Anniversary Commemoration. It's a first virtual conference on human-oriented leadership styles on the occasion of Swami Vivekananda ji's birth anniversary, holding from India, Tuesday, 12th January 2021, IST 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. We are privileged and blessed to have with us none other than Professor SUNITA Singh SENGUPTA ji, founder and honorary director, ISOL Global Foundation, and professor at University of Delhi. We are pleased to have with us Dr. J.L.RAINA, ISOL Foundation Board of Governors. Welcome, sir. It's a privilege, it's an auspicious day, it's a momentous occasion to have with us blessings of Swami SARVASTHANANDA ji, who is Minister in Charge, Ramakrishna Vedanta Center, Buckinghamshire, all across from the United Kingdom.
Namaste. Namaste.
Namaste. It's a pleasure to have with us Professor CORNE BEKKKER, Dean Regent University, University School of Divinity.
So wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Professor Jonathan Westover, Chair, Organizational Leadership Department, Utah Valley University, all across from United States of America. Thank you, Professor Jonathan Westover. We'll be also joining shortly with Dr. Ora Setter, Chairperson, PAI, Israeli Association of Organizational Development, and Professor BHUVAN Unhelkar, Professor at University of South Florida, United States of America. So to begin with, on this auspicious occasion, may I invite Professor Sunita Singh SENGUPTA ji, founder and honorary director, ISOL Global Foundation and professor at University of Delhi, for her welcome address.
At the outset, I welcome each and all the esteemed speakers. My special thanks to 10 News for providing this platform to commemorate 150th birthday of Swami Vivekananda. I'm extremely happy to have Dr. CORNE BEKKKER, with whom we started our first conference and the journey to explore integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. It's a true blessing to have whom we traveled together. I'm extremely grateful to all the esteemed speakers. Integrating a spirituality and organizational leadership draws insights from wisdom traditions. And ISOL Foundation sources its inspiration from Trinity, Sri Ramakrishna, Mahasharda, and Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda being the first Indian to take the Indian spiritual values to the West, and his address in World Parliament of Religion in 1893 is remembered by America with each Americans, and that's how we feel connected across border. Swami Vivekananda focused on inner strength, and this inner strength goes inside and gets translated into human-oriented leadership styles. We have with us esteemed speakers who will speak more on this. And with these few words, I once again welcome each and all of the speakers. I look forward learning from them. We have with us Swami SARVASTHANANDA, and Swamiji's blessing has always been with ISOL Foundation. With these few words, I once again welcome each and all the speakers and look forward learning from them. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Siddharth.
Thank you, ma'am. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is accomplished is the vision and mission of our founder and honorary director, Professor Sunita Singh SENGUPTA ji. Thank you for your welcome address, ma'am. It's a privilege and momentous pleasure to invite Dr. J.L.RAINA ji, ISOL Foundation Board of Governors, for his address. on this auspicious occasion of the virtual conference on human-oriented leadership styles on the occasion of Swamiji's birthday, spanning across from the 10 News Network.
Thank you, Dr. Siddharth. I am sure that this conference, one day, 2 hours conference basically, can rekindle in all of us as it is, and to the people who are listening to the World 10 News. I must thank 10 News. I join SUNITA in really thanking all the learned speakers who have taken the trouble of joining and being with us for this momentous occasion. Swamiji, as everybody knows, has had a meteoric life span, very short span of 39 years, but he left such a individual mark on the history or the time space that he is remembered all throughout. And everybody who reads him or hears him or at least listens to discourses gets so much carried away by his selfless, spirited and voluntary action to lift mankind out of the problems which we are facing even now. So I must really thank, and I consider it's my privilege to be with this organization, ISOL. Swami Vivekananda is our mentor virtually, along with the great Trinity, as Sunita has said, and hope we shall be discussing the real topic in some broader details today. It may not be possible to give so much time, but broader details are enough for us, at least seniors and youngsters will also get this thing. Swamiji had once said that once he virtually burnt himself as a dazzling flame and attracted moths. Even now he is attracting moths like us to his style of working. His style is unique, and hope we shall be really listening to good speakers now on the leadership styles which he himself set an example. Thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth, and welcome once again to all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Very well said. And that was address of Dr. J.L.RAINA ji, ISOL Foundation Board of Governors. It's time to learn from the speakers, to seek the blessings from the esteemed speakers. So who could be best? And they are the galaxy of speakers today on the occasion of Swamiji's birth anniversary. So it's a privilege and a pleasure and to seek the blessings as well as listen patiently from our Swami Sarvasthananda ji, eminent speaker, minister in charge, Ramakrishna Vedanta Center, Buckinghamshire. Sir, Swami ji, आपके आदेश, आपके निर्देश और आपके डिस्कोर्स के लिए हम सब तैयार हैं. Please.
I begin with a prayer dedicated to Swami Vivekananda on his auspicious birthday. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be speaking on Swami Vivekananda, who was a born leader, on a very important topic, human-oriented leadership styles, on the occasion of his birthday. January 12th is his birthday according to the English calendar. And coincidentally, it is his 125th anniversary. 125 years ago, he came to England and spread that universal message, a born leader that he was. All of us know that in those days, it was difficult for a person who was a colonial subject of a country that ruled India, England, and to speak with confidence, not only confidence, but a conviction, a spiritual conviction, and impress so many illustrious people, including people from the clergy. Today, 125 years after his first visit to England, he visited England 3 times. And as his name suggests, his pre-monastic name, Narendra, Narendra means in Sanskrit, leader of men. So the topic is also very appropriate. I should congratulate Sunita Singh Sengupta for this wonderful theme, human oriented leadership. Since Taylor, of course, management leadership is a very old concept, as old as uh, human civilization, since the early days of human civilization. But leadership as a management concept, since Taylor's management, and then we have so many schools of management and so many leadership styles with servant leadership, and there are so many various leadership. I'm not going into those details. Many of the illustrious speakers today would be dwelling upon that subject. But I would focus on one important event which happened 125 years ago when Swamiji first came to England. He stayed in a place which was not very far away from our center here. It's known as Maidenhead. It's in fact he was invited by Miss Henrietta Muller, who was a famous women's activist and one of the first graduates from Cambridge, women graduates from Cambridge. In those days, it was difficult for women to get a university education. And Henrietta Muller and Edward Sturdy invited Swami Vivekananda. He spent about 7 weeks in the first phase of his trip to England, and then he moved to London, where he delivered some of the greatest talks on Jnana Yoga and leadership in general, spiritual leadership, spiritually oriented leadership in general. And of course, the idea of an organizational leadership, to start an organization combining the best elements of the spiritual leadership of India and the Western styled leadership, which is, of course, based on many other uh, techniques. So he combined in him and started the organization Ramakrishna Mission after he left England, went to India in 1897. But before that, he spoke of this wonderful thing in one small meeting at about 3 p.m. in the evening in Mead House, which is hardly 5 miles away from Buckinghamshire. It's known as Maidenhead. And Pinckney's Green was the place. And Henrietta Muller, Edward Sturdy, Swami Shardananda, and many other people had gathered there. And they were also later, they were supposed to meet Max Muller as well, who was well known in Oxford in those days. Swami Vivekananda, in fact, visited Max Muller. And he was talking about the Indian civilization and its role in the Committee of Nations. What was the mission he had come to England for? What was his mission? So he very clearly spelled out that civilization has to be the civilization has to be turned upside down. That is the word he used. What he meant, nobody knew in those days. What he meant was that civilization has to be turned upside down by ideas which originated long ago, centuries ago, when India tried those spiritual ideals to uh, constitute what would be a leadership based on universal love, the universal spirit which is animating everybody. Unfortunately, Swami Vivekananda, when he came to this, the two world wars had not yet happened, but he anticipated them when he was traveling through Europe. He passed through Germany. He mentioned, in fact, that I smell of war here. And he said prophetically in those days, much before the World War One was to take place, he said, the whole of Europe is on the tip of a volcano which is about to burst. This he said in 1900 and 1900 when he undertook a Europe tour. After his 2 or 3 tours of England, during his third tour, he went for a small trip to Europe and he visited almost all the countries. And he said, unless the spirituality of the East is taken up by this Western civilization, which is based on materialism, and unless that is done, it is sitting on a tip of volcano ready to burst anytime. So this prophetically, he's mentioned this, and then we see the consequence of the prophecy that he made, not a consequence of the consequence of the wrong ideals which dominated Europe in those days. Spirituality had been the core of all religions of the world, not just Hinduism or India. Whenever a spiritual wave has arisen, whether it is Jesus Christ, Buddha, anywhere in the world, they have always tried to show that it is the progressive manifestation of the spirit within each human being which should motivate all human endeavor, whether it is day-to-day living, whether it is religion, or whether it is politics or any other human endeavor, should be guided by the essential divinity of the spirit which is there in every human being. And management is not an exception. All leadership theories. In fact, I remember there was a wonderful paper written by one of the founder directors of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, Mathai. So he discussed why human-centered leadership. It was, of course, based on the ancient spiritual values, Indian values, and he was one of the pioneers who specialized in Indian ethos for modern management. So, speaking about the Indian leadership style, he said it is intensely human-centric. The reason he said was, and Swami Vivekananda also mentioned this 100 years ago, that our religions of the world have become lifeless mockeries, in spite of the wonderful spiritual ideas inherent as the core of all those religions. Because the reason is religions have tended to become too much of theocentric rather than human centric. The core of religion or core of spirituality is the divine element which animates every human being, whichever religion, irrespective of his caste, creed, religion, ethnicity, or religion, or nationality, even. So, this core has been touched upon by almost all the prophets. That's the universal aspect of religion which Swami Vivekananda spoke in England in very strong and with a lot of conviction. And it impressed a lot of people here. Some of the genuine people who followed him later on and who helped him in his mission. Some of them were from England. Captain and Mrs. Xavier, who helped him to start a monastery where no god is worshipped except God is worshipped as spirit, the Mayavati in the Himalayas. So that was founded by Captain and Mrs. Xavier's, who were his disciples from England. Sister Nivedita, of course, is well known. Her role in propagating the universal ideas of spirit, the inspiration for which she got from her master and his master Sri Ramakrishna. These are all well known. These were his English disciples who were so impressed by his universal outlook and universal message, which could serve as an inspiration for all human endeavor, including leadership styles which we use in modern management. So O.P. Mr. Mathai once spoke of human leadership and he quoted the Max Planck Institute, which has won so many Nobel Prizes. Most of the people, the great Max Planck Institutes, which are scattered all over Europe, they use this as a model. They first have a person, a human being at the center of all the institutions, and they build the whole infrastructure and all the other processes around that person. The institution, in fact, is built by that human individual. So they give so much importance. And most of these institutes were headed by people who were great in their own field. They were selected, they were the best in their own field. This is just a mundane field of science. But even in science, the scientific research and the scientific methodology, they used this human-centered approach, having a human being as the center of these institutions known as Max Planck Institutes, and then they gave him the freedom the to develop the institute, to develop the infrastructure. Normally we have the infrastructure, we have the policies, we have the processes, and then we search for human beings. But here the process was reversed. First they caught hold of the human being, and that is what Swami Vivekananda said: man is in the center of all human endeavor. It's not the uh, processes that make a man, but it's man who the creativity of human being. If he is not in the center of all our processes and all our endeavors, then that institution or that leadership style is not likely to succeed. So man making was his main theme, the universal ideas of man making.
Mhm.
It is a human centered approach, and he wanted that to be applied to religion as well. Among all the endeavors, he said even religion has to be human centric. So he started this wonderful idea which he heard from his master, the service of God in man. He said, we have worshipped men, we have worshipped God. We had a theological approach to religion, and there was a quarrel between different religions trying to prove which God is greater than the other one. And then each one has had his own dogmatic approach to theological approach to religion, and there was a lot of quarrel, and that led to not only materialism, but even that was responsible for most of the wars that took place and gave religion a bad name. So he wanted spirituality to be human centered. From a theocentric approach to religion, he said, let us have a human centered approach to religion where human being, the core of divinity which is there in every human being, irrespective of his caste, creed, religion, uh, and nationality, if that is worshipped as service of God through the service of man as considering him to be divine. So that divinity, potential divinity of the human soul, was emphasized by him as the core spiritual value, which is the core spiritual value of all religions, and that can serve as a basis for revival of all religions, not just Hinduism. So this was the message he delivered, and this message can be applied to all human efforts, including leadership. And I'm very happy that the message he gave 125 years ago on the continent, on this continent, European continent, and before that he went to America, as Sunita ji just now mentioned. In 1893, when he first landed, he came with his master's message, the message of universal harmony. And Roma Rolla, the Nobel laureate who wrote a beautiful biography, he said Swami Vivekananda was a harmony of all human resources. He was all human energy, all human energy, secular as well as spiritual, were all beautifully harmonized in the personality of Swami Vivekananda. So he justifies the name that was given to him by his parents, Narendra, the leader of men. So on this auspicious day, I am very happy that a forum has been created by the efforts of Sunita Sengupta, Raina ji, and others, which has been working for so many years now on this wonderful theme of integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. So all organizations, whether they are industrial organizations, they are political organizations, or even spiritual or religious organizations, they should have a human-centered approach, and any leadership style which is based on spirituality, the core values of spirituality which are part of every major religion, and considering the human dignity, consider every human being as divine. If that is the core of the leadership, or core of any leadership style which is based on human being at the center, then I think it will succeed. So I once again congratulate the organizers for gathering together uh, so many expert speakers on this very important theme. The crisis that we are facing today because of the pandemic, we need these values all the more. The ideas of universal harmony, peace, and unselfishness based on recognizing this inherent divinity in every human being. And I hope this platform, as it has been doing all along, will uh, serve the purpose and create some kind of uh, create an atmosphere where these ideas can be spread all over the world. Thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. SENGUPTA, for asking me to speak a few words on this auspicious day of Swami Vivekananda's birthday.
Uh, Thank you so much, Pranam Swamiji, for your blessings, for your wisdom, which are still relevant on the occasion of Swami Vivekananda's 158th birth anniversary and for many, many more years to come in the year of 2021 and beyond. So we had with us had the discourse from Swami Sarvasthananda ji, Minister in charge, Ramakrishna Vedanta Center, Buckinghamshire. It's now pleasure and privilege to have with us Professor CORNE BEKKKER, 10 Regent University School of Divinity. Professor BEKKKER is a Dean, Regent University School of Divinity, and it's always a privilege and pleasure to have with him on this auspicious occasion on the first virtual conference on Swamiji's human-oriented leadership style on the occasion of his Swamiji's birthday, organized exclusively by ISOL Foundation and aired on 10 News Network. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the privilege, dear colleagues, that I can be with you today on this very important day and to have this great opportunity to learn together. Today, for a few moments, I would like to share on the value of humility in leadership. I'm going to share from my own faith tradition within a Western context. And thank you so much for the Swami that just spoke before. It was wonderful to learn so many wonderful insights within it and that we can come indeed together. Today, for a few moments, I want to speak about the problem of work. And I think we all recognize intensely that something is seriously wrong in our organizations today. Many people suffer from what I call meaningless work. The fact that they work and they're not entirely sure why is it that they work. The great Western leader Albert Schweitzer once referred to this as a sleeping sickness of the soul. Its symptoms are a loss of vision, community, morality, compassion, and meaning. And here I think it's important for us to ask a number of questions. Is there more to life than money, power, and position? Why do we lead? Why do we work? Why are we here? And I think one of the most foundational questions that leaders must ask for followers, and actually, in fact, I think everybody in the world should ask this question. Is it possible to work and have joy? Can we find joy in organizations? In the Christian tradition, there was a great theologian by the name of Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas very famously said, there can be no joy in living without joy in work. And I do believe that it's one of the primary roles of leaders to help their followers find joy in work again. So today, just for a few seconds, I would like to address 4 particular items. Firstly, the problem that we encounter with work, and then maybe from a Judeo-Christian perspective, explore what was the original purpose of work, and then identify what I believe the major problem that keeps us from having joy at work, and then just a few thoughts on how we can lead others to have not only joy in existence, but joy in work. Firstly, we need to understand that we suffer, this is particularly true within the Western context, of a number of conflicting ideas about work. Oscar Wilde, a famous, maybe infamous playwright, used to say the following, that work is the refuge of people who have nothing better to do. Can you believe what a silly statement he made? But it's also true within Western philosophy. Bertrand Russell, a very famous Western philosopher, once said that one of the symptoms of an approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is important. Therefore, in short, when it comes to work, we have a conflict of vision. One vision says that work could be a source of happiness, the other that it is a necessary evil. The question is there indeed another way? Within the Christian Catholic tradition, there's a wonderful organization that was started by Joseph Marie Escriva called Opus Dei. And Opus Dei, of course, in Latin, means the work of God. And Jose famously said, put a supernatural meaning behind your ordinary work, and you would have sanctified your work, and you will find joy in work. So what is the original meaning or purpose of work? Now, today I am speaking from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and within a Judeo-Christian philosophy of work, it is interesting to look at the Hebrew word for work. The Hebrew word for work is the word avodah. And avodah is an interesting word because in the Hebrew language, it is the word that is used for both worship and work. Have you ever thought about the connection? Could worship be work? Could work be worship? So this root word in Hebrew means both to work and to serve. And possibly this idea that one could transform our work into worship. Gerald Manley Hopkins famously wrote the following. He said, when man is in God's grace and free from mortal sin, then everything he or she does, so long as the person gives God glory. It's not only prayer, he says, it gives God glory, but smiting on an anvil, sawing a beam, whitewashing a wall, driving horses, sweeping, scouring, everything gives God glory. If being in his grace, you do it as your duty. All work indeed could be worship. But now the question is, what keeps us from having joy in work? In the Christian tradition, and especially in the monastic Christian tradition, which is a little bit younger than the monastic traditions within India and within other Eastern religions, and this monastic tradition really started within the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, there was a teaching about the 7 prime sins. And it's quite interesting, and you all are familiar with the 7 deadly sins, starting with pride and ending all the way to anger. And these are sins that we often see in organizational leaders. But what is interesting is that originally there were not 7 sins, but 8. Today, I would like to focus on the 8th sin, or the 8th deadly sin. And this, of course, is the sin of acedia. And acedia, the early Christian monastic thinkers really identified as the major sin that keeps us from finding meaning in our work. Acedia is, of course, from a Greek word, akadia, which literally means not to care. The best definition of acedia is moral sloth. And it simply means that we are not spending enough time carefully thinking about the world that we live in. We are not asking deeper questions. In essence, we do not care. The scholar Dorothy Sayers have worked extensively on the problem of acedia and as it relates to work and leadership. And Dorothy writes, the person that struggles with acedia is the one who believes in nothing, cares for nothing, seeks to know nothing, interferes with nothing, enjoys nothing, hates nothing, finds purpose in nothing, lives for nothing, and remains alive because there's nothing for which it will die. And often our obsession with money, power, prestige, and privilege is a sign of this prime sin, acedia. Now, the question today, as I start to conclude, is what is the answer to acedia? What is the answer to moral sloth? In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the answer is simple. And the answer is very simply humility. Regent Sutterfield, a great scholar that studies humility in organizational leadership, writes, he says, I believe the answer to this problem of acedia in the workplace is humility. Now, what's interesting, folks, is that in at least the Western tradition, the word humility comes from a Latin word that's connected with the word human. It comes from the Latin word humus, which means earth. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, it says that man was created from earth, from the dust of the ground. And so lowliness or humility is that connection, not only with lowliness and with the ground, but a deep connection with what does it mean to be human. And so the answer is to practice humility in leadership. Now, a quick question. How do we develop humility? Humility is not a gift. We're not born with it. It is something that is learned. And in the Christian tradition, and especially some Christian monastic traditions, there is a way to humility. Benedict of Nursia, whom many consider to be the father of Christian monasticism in the 6th century, wrote a rule for monastics. And in that rule, he speaks of a 12-step system to develop humility. Very quickly, I would like to take us through that list and appropriate it for organizational leadership. I've written quite extensively about what I would call the Benedictine 12-step towards organizational leadership humility. In essence, one can think of this as AA for pride, 12 steps to combat pride. Rule 1 for leaders, recognize God, respect God, understand that all leadership is ultimately under the authority of a higher power. Step 2, reject your personal desires. Humble leaders curb their own desires for fame and achievement, ever aware of the possibilities of pride and arrogance. Step 3, submit to leaders. Humble leaders readily follow and obey those placed over them in organizations. Step 4, be steadfast. Humble leaders willingly turn the other cheek in situations of conflict and always work towards peace and harmony. Rule 5, be transparent. Humble leaders are honest and transparent about their own limitations and weaknesses. Step 6, be content with where you are. Humble leaders try to be content in their current positions, jobs, and general situation of life, and so not to use their leadership as next steps in their own quest for fame. Step 7, see yourself correctly. Humble leaders adopt a discipline of internal reflection and do not seek to place the blame on others. Step 8, stay within boundaries. Humble leaders obey all the organizational rules, not just the letter, but also the spirit. Rule 9, control your tongue. Humble leaders understand that no words from a leader is neutral. As we have seen recently in the United States, when leaders use their words to incite others to violence, it is not humility. Rule 10 or step 10, avoid mindless frivolity. Humble leaders consciously seek to cultivate humility and seek what does this mean in organizational settings, specifically for their followers. Step 11, speak plainly and clearly. Humble leaders talk in a low voice, speak gently and with kindness to everyone in organization. And lastly, step 12, final step, have a humble posture. Humble leaders act humble not only in appearance, but as well as in their heart. I do believe, dear colleagues, if we can learn to cultivate ultimately humility and leadership, we can help our followers to find great joy in their work and recognize that work could be worship. Thank you so much, dear colleagues.
I think it was a privilege to listen to a great professor on the leadership style, particularly the theme of selfless impact on society by one developing such leadership as Swamiji had propounded can really influence the whole of the society. So may I, on behalf of ISOL, thank Professor for his learned remarks, and request the next speaker, who is the
Sunita? Professor Jonathan Westover is the next speaker. May I humbly request Jonathan Westover to start his deliberation. It's a great pleasure to have you, John. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I really appreciate the insights that have been shared thus far, which resonate so deeply with me and connect with both my experience and the research that I'm engaged in my everyday work. I think it's really important for us to always look for this connection between meaning, purpose, spirituality, and work. And so I think the last talk was spot on, and I really hope to build a little bit off of some of the ideas that have been shared. I wanted to share my screen with you so I can share some visuals. So I'm going to attempt to do that right now.
Dr. Siddharth, is he there?
No.
All right. Can you see my slides?
No.
Can you see this?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So again, it's such a wonderful honor to be invited to be part of this group and to share some of my thoughts. And I wanted to focus my comments this morning or this evening in around the idea of servant leadership and the role of servant leadership in fostering that mentality and how it's necessary in the future of work. I wanted to quickly just mention that the ideas that I'm drawing from for this presentation come from my recent book, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership, which I feel also fits quite nicely with the focus and theme for today. Here you can see my conception of the intersection between leadership and service and why it's so important for us to foster humility, as has already been shared, and to foster this servant leadership mindset. So for me, leadership at its core is all about serving and empowering those you encounter in various leadership roles. And the only way you can do that is starting with deep personal self-knowledge and understanding. We have to do the deep spiritual work of critical self-reflection, of mindfulness on a continual basis in a sustained fashion in order for us to really truly be connected to ourselves. And if we can't be connected to ourselves, the chances of us having authentic empathy and being able to develop trust relationships with those around us is very small, if not impossible. And once we understand ourselves, we have the opportunity to better understand others and those we lead and serve. And it's a reciprocal process. So the more we understand others, the more we understand ourselves, and so forth. And with that as a foundation, then as leaders, we can develop other corresponding skills. There's lots of things that leaders need to do in the day-to-day. And so we can develop those skills, those abilities, those capabilities and competencies. And then over time, we can apply them and learn in an iterative fashion so that we can become more effective in our management, our administration, and our leadership. But in all of this, it needs to create feedback loops so that we can learn from both our successes and our failures, and the successes and failures of those we lead and serve. And then collectively, we lift each other and we're able to learn and grow and develop into our potential and ultimately achieve really great things. So I feel like this is the foundation of everything that it means to be a leader. I also briefly wanted to share with you a Korean proverb. I lived for several years in various Asian countries. And as a young man, for the first time, I lived in South Korea. This was my first experience being in a predominantly Buddhist and Confucius culture, having been born and raised in the United States in a Judeo-Christian tradition. And I was so fascinated with the culture and with the meaning that was derived from so many important idioms and proverbs and just the language of the Korean people. Early on, I learned about this proverb, frog in a well, and it really resonated with me. For those of you who are familiar with Plato's Allegory of the Cave, it's a very similar meaning. And essentially, if we think of ourselves as a frog at the bottom of a well, if we're born and raised down there, that's our entire world. We don't know any different. So all of us are like frogs at the bottom of a well. It's safe, it's secure, it's our upbringing, and it's the values espoused by our families and our communities and our faith traditions, and even the cultures within our workplaces. But over time, the dark, cold, trapped nature of us being at the bottom of a well starts to dissipate as we become connected with other people and get familiar with difference. And essentially, as we mature, as we grow and we learn and we interact with others, we start to climb out of the well. We start to emerge from the well. And many individuals, once they get to the top of the well, they look around and they see that, in fact, they're not the only well. There's wells all over the landscape. Each well has a little frog peeking its little head out over the top of the well. And for the first time, the frog might realize that their reality is just one of many different experiences in this world. And for the first time, they realize that there's a vastness in the world that they had never known before. Some frogs get nervous and they retreat back down into their well. They retreat back down into their dogma, into their ideology, while others decide they want to go explore. And sometimes it results in frogs going into other wells and essentially trading dogma and ideology for ideology. But still other frogs embrace the messiness, the complexity, the nuance of living in a complex world with people that come from vastly different backgrounds, and they learned to live within that condition and thrive within it. And it's my belief that both personally and within the workplace, as we foster a servant leadership mindset, that it's essential for us to get outside of ourselves, to get outside of our the limited nature of our thoughts and our perceived reality, so that we have the potential of recognizing and understanding the backgrounds, the experiences of all of those we lead and serve, and thereby develop meaningful relationships, having the opportunity to empower our people and allowing them to do their very best work. That's my hope and goal for all the students I teach, for all of the leaders I work with as a consultant, and ultimately I hope that everyone will find that kind of success. This leads us to the idea of the value of diversity. And I don't want to take more than just a moment on this, but of course in the diversity wheel, we recognize that we have those more obvious forms of diversity, which are important, we need to recognize. But some of the most important work we do in diversity, equity, and inclusion is at those deeper levels, where we want to create organizations that genuinely and authentically value each individual for who they are, and allow and create a safe space of meaning, purpose, and belonging, so that everyone has the opportunity to contribute in meaningful ways. I think that's a foundational outcropping of this whole idea of frog in a well, that we need to learn to value diversity, and we need to create inclusive cultures and organizations of belonging, meaning, and purpose. So how does this all connect back to work? We all know that the nature of work has been shifting dramatically in response to various geopolitical, socioeconomic, and technological shifts in the world. And just speaking for a moment about technological innovations, we know that, and it's been highlighted by this COVID pandemic, that we are quickly moving towards embracing technologies that are going to fundamentally change the very nature and experience that we have with work. And as was mentioned previously, what does that mean for the meaning of work that we have? If I'm working remotely and I rarely, if ever, physically connect with and am in the same physical location with my colleagues and within a physical office space with my organization, what does that mean for my purpose? What does that mean for my connection to company culture? And what do organizations need to do to better foster meaning and belonging and purpose with their people, even in a virtual world that we've been living in during this pandemic? Here you see some of the skills that I believe are needed for the future of work. And just to briefly mention a couple, because I don't have time to go into all these in any sort of depth. One thing that I think is very vital is along the outer ring, you can see the main drivers of some of these shifts in the nature of work. Within the inner circle, you can see all these different skills that are needed. And I believe that transdisciplinarity is one of those core elements that's going to be essential for effective leaders in the future of work. We need more individuals that get outside of their silos, who are capable with a servant leadership mindset to authentically connect with people from various backgrounds, who can synthesize enormous amounts of information and bring about productive, collaborative, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary work teams to drive innovation and success. If we want organizations that are up to the challenge of the complex world that we live in and how quickly things are shifting in the future of work, then I think that's one of those essential skills that will absolutely be necessary moving forward. Something else I wanted to share in connection specifically with the topic for today. There's so much to be learned from various faith traditions. And here I just wanted to share very briefly some of the core values and commitments, even within the humanist tradition. As we focus on human-centered leadership, it is so essential that we do things like develop empathy, that we have greater global awareness. Humility has already been mentioned, that we take on personal responsibility for our actions, for our words, and how those influence those around us. We need to have a social justice orientation because there's so many challenges and so many individuals that are hurting and struggling, and we have the potential to be change makers to help improve their situation and to make life better so everyone has an opportunity to live a life of dignity. And ultimately, whether we're talking about leaders within an organization striving to respect their people and treat everyone with dignity and respect within their team, or we're talking about change agents and leaders within communities and within societies, it's essential that we have leaders that have an ethical and moral center, who fight for and are willing to stand for those who are marginalized and may be the most vulnerable among us. This all leads us to a variety of questions for organizational leaders. Ultimately, leadership across organizations, across industries, they need to be thinking very carefully about, what does the future of work mean for me, for my organization, for my people? How do I connect an authentic servant leadership approach to making sure that my people feel heard, they feel valued, they feel that they have the opportunity to truly contribute within the organization, connecting their meaning, their purpose to the organization's meaning and purpose to drive great outcomes for organizations. And with that, I believe I'm about out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share just for a few minutes some of my thoughts, and appreciate the opportunity for further dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very illustrative presentation, Professor. It's a very, very detailed, illustrative, and very relevant presentation in today's times to commemorate the real tribute to the Swamiji's birthday, on the occasion of Swamiji's birthday. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Okay, so we now move forward to our eminent next speaker who have joined with us. Professor Ora hasn't joined. Ma'am, please guide. So, hello. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. I cannot.
I request Dr. J.L.RAINA, Chairman, ISOL Foundation, Board of Governors, to share his gratitude to Professor Jonathan Westover for his brilliant presentation. And after that, we request Professor BHUVAN UNHELKAR. So, Dr. Raina, please.
It is again a privilege to listen to other speakers. He really presented in a very short, concise form through his presentation slides the very theme of a person, leadership, which one has to develop for himself. I mean, there's always that in practicing selflessness, one has to have some element of selfishness also, because a person can get evolved through that spirit of learning from various speakers. And I think we have heard him very, very intense. At least I have heard him very intensely. I really thank him for all the trouble of his knowledge on this thing in a short span of a little time. Thank you once again, and may we move to Professor UNHELKAR, also on Indian ethos.
Thank you so much, Professor RAINA sir, and Professor Jonathan Westover. Thank you once again for such a enlightening presentation. It's now time to have an eminent learned speaker, eminent speaker of the day, Professor BHUVAN UNHELKAR, professor at University of South Florida, to share his views on the auspicious occasion of Swamiji's birth anniversary commemoration.
Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahe, Tejasvina Vaditamastu, Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste and good morning to all my friends good morning from Florida, the eminent panelists, organizers, SUNITA ma'am, Dr. RAINA sir, Dr. Gupta and everyone, and the audience who are listening, who may be in morning, afternoon, evening, or even night time in Australia. So the theme of Swamiji's message, arise, awake, and dream no more. Also stop not till the goal is reached. It was presented by Swami Vivekananda, whose birth name was Narendranath Datta. And as I was preparing for our wonderful event, wonderful conference, I visited Times of India, And there is another Narendra who has reminded the youth all over the world of another very beautiful message: muscles of iron and nerves of steel. And that's the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. So I was fascinated as I was going through the material, as I was preparing for this sharing of thoughts, and as I was listening to Dr. BEKKKER, Dr. Westover, Swamiji, I thought it's a vast field. And when we talk about organizational leadership, there are so many aspects to it. And that includes the stock market, that includes command and control, that includes motivation, ethics, law, accounting, finance, and so on. And supply chain, if I may add, because I'm a professor of information technology. Look at the various types of organizations we deal with. The typical business organization with its finance and accounting, stock market, and profitability. Then there are government organizations, the whole bureaucracy, if you like, that is involved in providing services or managing the country, the nation, or smaller units. Then there is the army style organization, the defense organization, that is strictly hierarchical, where the values are not to question why. There are also service organizations. I'm a Rotarian for almost 20 years, and Rotary has been around for 100 plus years. And that is providing tremendous service, including the flagship project of End Polio Now. And it has its own style of leadership, which does not work on rewards and punishment. The leadership required there is very, very close to what Dr. Westover was talking about, servant leadership. And then there are religious organizations like Isha Foundation, like Ramakrishna Vivekananda Mission, which is heavily based on service. But these organizations require a completely different style of leadership. So the question is, how do we discuss human-centric leadership in these various organizations? Just a few weeks back, Dr. Sunita Singh SENGUPTA had invited me to be on another discussion where I was highlighting the difference between doing and being. And most of the Western approaches to management, leadership in any of these various organizations I mentioned is based on the doing. Something will happen only when I do it. But the Eastern approach, and I'm not contradicting the two, I'm not comparing the two, I'm saying if we bring in those kind of values in our leadership, then they have to acknowledge happening. And I was talking about existentialism there, when a very nice comment came about, and that was that we don't call ourselves human doings, we call ourselves human beings. And perhaps the language has a deep philosophy in it for why we call ourselves human beings. Because essentially, we are beings, we are existential. And anything and everything we do, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, the shloka that I stated right at the beginning is all around doing work. Sahana bhavatu sahana bhunaktu is something that I used to recite as a child at the start of every meal. It was my grace, if you like. And it really talks about the fact that we are together, we are enjoying life together, we are going to work together, we are going to put our energies together, and we pray to the Almighty to remove all obstacles in our work. This is a very poor and a rough translation, but it is the gist that I understood. So then, when we talk about organizational leadership and its intersection with human-centric, with the spiritual values, what are we really talking about? We are talking about the fact that we are existential, and any human-centric approach to leadership, to management, to administration has to start with this basic axiom that humans are beings. I have worked a lot in project management as well. I belong to College of Business, and I have a few books around Agile, which is a flagship methodology, if you like, of working in initially software projects, but now it has expanded into organizational structure. And once with PMBOK, that is Project Management Body of Knowledge, and Six Sigma and so on, the desire was to tighten the work to an extent where everything is extremely well measured, and the profitability is increased and the wastage is reduced. But I found it fascinating that the thinkers in the project management space sort of rebelled against it. The original culprit, in quotes, is Frederick Taylor, who created the concept of work breakdown structure, which means any work, every work, any process, I will break it down into the smallest possible unit, and I can enter it in, say, Microsoft Project or any other project management tool, and I will track it, and I will assign people, I'll put them in these slots. Now, a while ago, almost 20 years back, I listened to a fascinating keynote address by Kent Beck in Santa Barbara. I was visiting at that time. I was a student at the time, or had just finished my PhD. And he had just literally 3 slides, and those were just slides as they slide, not PowerPoint. I forget what the first slide was, but the second slide was talking about Frederick Taylor and work breakdown structure. And he was giving a keynote on Agile, his method. So there are various Agile methods. Scrum is one of them, and Ken Beck's was extreme programming at that time. And the third slide only had one word on it, conversation, because his key theme was that when we make work so rigorous and so defined, we lose humanity in it. And humanness, human beingness, is centered around conversation. So the whole Agile approach, in fact, you can go to the Agile Manifesto website, and there are like 4 biblical statements there. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and working solution over comprehensive documentation, and customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over a plan. And all of these are actually making sure that humans in work are not dehumanized. And it has got its values and its principles apart from these manifesto statement. And some of the words are for the values of Agile are trust, honesty, simplicity, and courage. And as a person with 3.5 decades of experience, I can honestly tell you that we don't need any Agile methodology to tell us the importance of these words. And there are zillions of instances where successful leaders have applied trust, honesty, simplicity, and courage, whether they knew any project management method or not. So when it comes to human-centric leadership, these are some of the values that play a significant role in providing opportunities for humans to flourish. In my book, The Art of Agile Practice, which was also very funny, it's a CRC press publication, I had to argue with my publisher why the word art should be included in a project management engineering textbook. And it's not just a textbook, it's also used by consultants. And I said, any successful leadership is an art form. It's not engineering and science. It uses engineering and science, but it is still a extremely beautiful art form. And I find that happening at business level, at defense level, at government level, and also at spiritual level. So I had insisted on pushing the word art, and then I took the liberty of adding one more value. And this is something that I find my management students come back to me and discuss a lot, and various other audiences have discussed with me. And that keyword that I added was unhurriedness. Now, I don't know whether such a word exists or whether such a word needs to be promoted, but my experience is that a good leader is in no hurry. His or her concept of time is quite different to the panic-stricken, neurotic, madly goal-driven leader who drives the entire organization or the entire country to nuts. I remember a very small anecdote about Swami Vivekananda. Once he had to catch a ship. There was a ship that he had to catch, and he was running late. And someone said, Swamiji, you have no idea of time. And Swamiji looked back and said, I am not in time. Time is in me. And it took me decades to understand what Swamiji was saying. And I just think that he must have been a very relaxed, unhurried person who could just stand in front of a completely new audience and say, sisters and brothers of America. I also found it fascinating, although as a school-going kid, I had to study, and the lesson said that this was the first time someone addressed the audience in this manner. But I very recently came to know that actually there were 3 more speakers before Swamiji, and it happened to be 9/11, 11th of September, which is unfortunately also a day remembered in America for wrong reasons, for bad reasons. But 11th of September 1893, when Swamiji stood in that hall in Chicago and addressed Sisters and Brothers of America, and those sisters and brothers clapped for close to 3 minutes, I realized that this was the 4th time a speaker was addressing the audience as such. And why is it that it was Swamiji's words that drew so much of applause? And my understanding is that it was the person behind the words rather than the words. And this continuously holds true in all the various organizational structures that I mentioned, whether it is an army being ordered to go into war, or whether it is a religious organization that is encouraging people to sink deep inside themselves. It is the person, the human being, or the beingness of the human that plays a significant role. I also enjoyed Dr. BEKKKER talk about humility, but with due respect, I thought I will highlight something that may not exactly be cultivation of humility. And here I would like to quote J. Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I love and respect immensely. And his famous statement in his book, Freedom from the Known, is cultivated humility is not humility at all. And I'm not contradicting you, sir, Dr. Becker, but I'm trying to bring your statement and J. Krishnamurti's together to perhaps say that the word humility, which was so nicely, beautifully explained, which has to do with earth. And in India, earth is always considered as Mother Earth, from where we have come. So perhaps the word HUM, the keywords humility and human, have something in common. Maybe we are born with it, then we forget it, and therefore we need all the 12 steps that you, sir, highlighted. I enjoyed them very much. But here it is. If it is there in us, then it needs to be uncovered rather than being cultivated. I have spoken a lot. I can speak a lot as well, but I also enjoyed listening, especially Dr. Westover and that frog allegory. Actually, the frog allegory is a famous one that Swami Vivekananda had repeated many a times, in which he had said, he gives the story of a frog from the ocean suddenly jumps and falls into a well where there is a frog in the well who has lived there forever. And the well frog asks the ocean frog, how big is your ocean? Is it 10 times the well? Is it 1,000 times the well? And the ocean frog keeps saying, no, no, no. And eventually the well frog says, then you are a liar. And I am just hopeful that with an event like this, with a conference like this and many more, we will not fall into the trap of the well frog, because maybe there is an ocean, maybe there is something that we need to explore, even if we may not be knowing it. So let me conclude by saying that organizational leadership and human-centered organizational leadership in particular is going to make use of the beingness of human rather than only focusing on the doingness. And also with deep respect to Swami Vivekananda, I would like to quote a beautiful sentence written on a samadhi. This is Osho's samadhi in Pune, Maharashtra. And on that samadhi is written this: never born, never died, only visited earth. And then his birth and passing away date. To me, Swami Vivekananda was never born, never died. Today, a few 100+ years back, he came to us, stayed with us for 39 years, and his spirit still exists. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity, and Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Bhuvan Anilkarji, Professor at University of South Florida, for sharing your views on a special Swami Vivekananda ji's birth anniversary occasion. Now, it gives an immense pleasure to invite Dr. Krishna Kumar, MB, to share his views and thoughts on human-oriented leadership styles on the occasion of Swami Vivekananda's 158th birth anniversary. Professor Krishna Kumar.
Salam to all. Unfortunately, my network is not very stable as of now, so I'm afraid I will be able to. You all will be able to hear me properly. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Please proceed, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for. It's a very auspicious day for the Indian society as a whole. The time when India, the idea of India was crystallizing. Swami Vivekananda, as a or soul and soul representation, both SOL and SOU, represent of the spirit of India. gave a could step into the realms outside the Indian continent, Indian subcontinent, and a huge dynamic view of the spectra of Indian spirituality and the orientation what Hinduism is about. As such, there is we cannot say that there is something called Hinduism. It is Indian. India is a word which is misconstrued even today, which Swamiji had no misconstrued. Swamiji had a very clear idea of what India meant and what Bharat meant. So, Dr. Becker was saying, I was he threw a light on the human face of Swamiji's vision, how spirituality, Indian spirituality has to amalgamate with the Western philosophy, and how the transition should take place in India at par with the the transition. Swamiji did not want India. His speeches in Madras, his speeches after coming back from the Western world, there was a vast difference. So what he wanted India was to have a leadership in every individual, not that India should have single or one in this country should have, everyone in this country should have a leadership quality which is astoundingly sustaining, and it should have the imperative perspective view of the past, present, and the futuristic. So he wanted to build up a society for.
It seems he lost connection. You can take it forward, Dr. Siddharth. It seems he lost connection.
I think we lost connection due to network problem. But nevertheless, the spirit is always the same of Dr. Krishnan Kumar, who have been sharing his views on occasion of Swamiji's birthday. So before we go for the formal vote of thanks, so I would like to have any question answers, any questions pertaining to any eminent speakers or any discussion among the distinguished guests. So we still have some time. If any, please allow me to, so that I can proceed for this. And
sure. Sure. I have just an observation to share. The way the flow of the deliberations was, I was really thrilled by that. Dr. Becker talked about the humility in leadership. And when Dr. Westover talked about, further in that servant leadership and how the service component adds value to it, Swami SARVASTHANANDA started with the perspective from the Ramakrishna order and what Swami Vivekananda emphasized. And then Professor BHUVAN UNHELKAR, an IT professor, took it how agile organizations can be developed. So it just happened the way it happened. But I would like to share that Swami Vivekananda's spiritual master always used to say that you have to be a human being first. You have to be human first, and rest of the thing follows. With Swami Vivekananda started focusing on inner strength, and he said, start believing yourself. And his master always says, as many views, so many paths, but the realization is same. So I just wanted to share this, and I request anyone who would like to share their thoughts, that will be wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Siddharth.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your observation and sharing with the audience and the eminent speakers.
I think, can I share my assessment of this
Sure.
gathering? Actually, I have always believed, again, I will go to that personal belief of selfishness. That is what I have taken from this gathering of elites right now, with starting with Swamiji, Sarvasthananda ji, who has really elaborated the mission of Swamiji himself. I mean, one has to really appreciate this, that in a span of 39 years, probably he was knowing that he will go from this world soon. But nevertheless, his, whole importance or thrust on doing something for the people. I think I had read in his work, these missions work during Bengal famine. And many people were leaving the place, but he stood there and exhorted all his associates that we must not leave this place and we have to serve God. Gods were people. So they serve God with everybody. And that self God has got to be appreciated, because the basic theme of human life is not to live under stress anytime. And that part can be achieved only if we give away and do not retain anything with us in terms of bad influence, in terms of bad habits, in terms of bad company. Probably this choosing has got to be a person's inner thinking, that I have to be this way and I can otherwise land into problem. And that problem is generating stress, because anything which is there impinging on his mind will always generate stress. Swamiji never wanted people to be under stress and always do something for the people. And that probably is the theme of today's gathering, that we must own this concept of serving the people. Then only we can learn to be human leaders. And this has gone right now into organizations, even households, that when I have always said that child looks to his parents now to see that how they are doing. Then only he adopts himself into that mode. Otherwise, he is always questioning that aap nahi karte ho, main kyun karunga? You are not doing anything, why should I do? So this type of reasoning has got to come in with people, that he has to be a role model, and role models can only help us in living with the present times, which are very difficult times, because stresses are all around us, and how we can come out of those stresses is probably the theme. And I have taken away from this gathering of elites, I say that there is a possibility for us to develop this concept. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. RAINA sir, for your valuable inputs and insights pertaining to today's conference. So, time has come to propose a formal vote of thanks, and it gives immense pleasure to propose the ISOL Foundation vote of thanks, Swami Vivekananda's 158th birth anniversary, to organize human-oriented leadership style virtual conference on the occasion of Swamiji's birthday. And at the outset, we would like to thank our esteemed ISOL founder and honorary director, Professor Sunita SINGUPTA ji, ISOL Global Foundation and Professor, University of Delhi, for making our conference a big success. We thank from the heart, bottom of our hearts, Dr. J.L.RAINA, ISOL Foundation Board of Governors, for his untiring support and always an excellence and its meticulous guidance. It gives immense pleasure to thank Swami Sarvasthananda ji, Minister in Charge, Ramakrishna Vedanta Center, Buckinghamshire, for his views, and an eminent speaker in today's conference. We, at the outset, ISOL Foundation thanks Professor CORNE BEKKKER, Dean, Regent University School of Divinity, for graciously accepting an invitation and sharing his plethora of knowledge and wisdom on today's occasion. It gives momentous pleasure to thank Professor Jonathan Westover, Chair, Organizational Leadership Department, Utah Valley University, for excellent presentation, sharing his insights, invaluable beliefs in today's conference. We thank Professor BHUVAN UNHELKAR, Professor at University of South Florida, to be with us on auspicious occasion and sharing his beliefs, words, and wisdom. It gives immense pleasure to thank our chairperson, Dr. Ora Setter, PAI, Israeli Association of Organizational Development, for her wishes, as well as for keeping us in her prayers in her mind. And followed with, it gives immense pleasure to thank Dr. Krishna Kumar for sharing his words of wisdom. Thank you so much, ISOL Foundation, and thank you so much, 10 News Network audience, for joining us and sparing us their valuable time with us on today's occasion. Thank you, one and all. Jai Hind.
Our vote of thanks to... Thank you.